What's going on, guys? How are we doing today? So if you saw our last deck profile, we kind of broke it down into different categories like starters, extenders, different types of extenders, your blowout cards, your defensive cards, things like that. Today we're going to talk about, well, at least for Cyber Dragons, the pretty much the basics of deck building and some pretty good tips, hints, things like that, which cards fall into which categories, how much of each of them you should be running, and kind of just break it down for you guys that way to help you guys build your decks most optimal, well, possible. This is not going to cover different variants, things like that, so take that into some consideration, and as always, you can play whatever you want. These are just some recommendations from us. First and foremost, we have our starter cards. There's Cyber Dragon Core and Cyber Emergency. Starters are cards that do something on their own. They're cards that you pretty much always want to open. They're cards that help you, well, start your plays. Additionally, Core and Emergency each are one card Dragoons, which we do recommend playing the Dragoon package because, well, it just makes your Cyber Dragon deck better. But no, you do not have to play it. It also makes your Core or Emergency a one card Nightmare Phoenix to pop a back row, something like that. But yeah, so Core and Emergency, play 3 of each, guys. Like, we only have 6 starters. Ideally, you want to play 10 to 12 or 13 starters if you can, but Cyber Dragon doesn't have it. We only have 6, so you really need to max out and play all 6. After our starters, we have our extenders. We're going to break extenders up into 2 different categories, superior and additional. We do these because, well, if you've seen some of the best deck builders in the game's history, this is stuff that they talk about and, well, cover. If you go on TCG Player for their articles or whatnot, if you read some by Johnny Lee, he has really good deck building ones that we mentioned in that last video, but maybe I'll throw that link in the description down below. But we read through those and a lot of stuff made sense. A lot of it we didn't really necessarily agree with in the first couple articles, but then he tied it all together really well when he talked about decks that cannot follow the golden rules, like 10 plus starters. Cyber Dragons can't follow that. You got to learn the rules so you can break the rules, but that's what we're going to do today. So extenders, starting off with superior. Superior extenders are cards that pair up with your starter very, very nicely. You notice that Cyber Emergency is a starter and a superior extender because, well, it goes really, really good with your Core. And yeah, you could technically say Core is a great extender if you open Emergency Core, but Core is really the starter in that scenario because it's your normal summon, it's the card you're going for. Emergency is only a starter if you don't open your Core, so Core isn't really going to get labeled as an extender here. So these are all cards where, like I said, they pair up with your Core or your Emergency, essentially your Core. Any of these cards plus Core does something, you know, whether that's Dragoon or it's Infinity Dragoon or it's even more than that. These cards pair up with Cyber Dragon Core really, really well, and those being Cyber Dragon Hearts, Cyber Dragon Fear, Galaxy Soldier, Cyber Emergency, Cyber Repair Plant, Cyber Rev System, Machine Duplication, and Monster Reborn. Overall, for extenders, I do recommend playing 12 to 18. Ideally, if you read those articles that we mentioned, I believe they say 12 to 15, but again, we lack the starters, so a few more extenders is not a bad thing by any means. Superior extenders, I would play at least 10 of these. You absolutely want more superior extenders than additional because, well, they pair up with your Core better, which brings us to the additional starters. I recommend playing at least 2 of these cards. We're going to have quite the list here because we tried to cover pretty much anything I've seen people play in Cyber Dragon, other than like throwing other variants in. So we're not covering like Anchor Drill for the Calamities play, we're not covering Orcus, we're not covering Scraps, we're not covering ABCs, Synchro plays, any of that stuff. We're just kind of covering pretty much a standard pure, if you will, build, and obviously Dragoon. So additional extenders, like I said, play 2 plus of these. I mean, if you're playing 10 superior and 8 additional, I guess I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. If you're going for the 18, I'd probably do something like 13 to 15 and then fill in the blanks with the additional starters. But anyway, without further ado, we have Cyber Dragon Naxter, can't even think right now, Overload Fusion, sorry guys, even though it's, well, I mean, it's on the screen for you, but it's not on the screen for me at the moment. Foolish Burial is another additional extender, 1 for 1. Infernal Reckless Summon is a spicy one that I used to play and really liked it, and I've seen people talking about it more and more again. Maybe we'll make a build abusing it. Cyber Dragon Dry, Instant Fusion, and T 30 something 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 Vic Viper. So the difference between additional and superior, like we mentioned, superior extenders pair up with your Cyber Dragon core really, really well, whereas your additional extenders, well, they need just that additional support to really extend your plays. Like core Naxter, that's not going to do a whole lot. I mean, you could search out emergency, search out like hers, pitch it, summon your Naxter, and now you can go into a Dragoon or something that way. But to really get advantage from these additional extenders, you need more setup, and ideally you don't want to necessarily open these cards. Overload Fusion can be an exception to that, where it can be an extender. Foolish Burial, I guess. 1 for 1 I'm not a big fan of, just because it's a huge neg if it gets negated, and even if it doesn't, you're not really plussing, and just other cards do things better. Infernal Reckless Summon way more often than not is completely dead going first, but it can really take people off guard going second. Dry, not a fan of personally. Instant Fusion, it's a one of that I'm not a big fan of, because I don't want to play 1 to 2 even spots my extra deck for a one of. And then Vic Viper is another fun little card that actually pairs up with Infernal Reckless Summon really, really well, and if you want to see someone do that, click the link in the description below to go check out our friend Insane yugioh. He does a lot of really cool builds like that, and he has an Infernal Reckless Summon one with Vic Viper that is actually pretty neat, and he, well, spams out a lot of cards and, well, deals a lot of damage, because they all boost machines by 1200 each, and they just stack up really, really quickly. So again, 10 plus superior, 2 plus additional, 12 to 18 total extenders. Keeping in mind you're already playing 3 emergency, this goes towards your extender count as well as your starter account, because we said play 6 starters, core and emergency. So those 3 emergency are already figured into your 12 to 18 extenders, so you need 9 to 15 more. Blowout cards, these are some of the fun cards where if you see it, it can completely swing the match in your favor. If you see it, it can bring you back from being in a really bad spot, where it can just blow out your opponent. That's kind of the name of it. Ideally, you only want like 2 to 3 of these, because they need, way more often than not, they need more setup than an additional extender. They're not a turn 1 card, they're a turn 2, 3, into the late grind game, blow out your opponent card. We have Cyber Eltanin. Chaos Dragon Levineer is another one that sees play on and off in the deck, but I mean, being able to revive something, put out the big body, pop 2, rank 8 plays, like, it has a lot of utility. Cybernetic Overflow also, well, it's kind of a blowout, you know, you get that grave setup, you do your turns, you get everything all good, and then you just blow up your opponent's board. Red Eyes Fusion, I didn't know exactly where to put this one, because it's really not an extender and it's not really a starter. It's, well, so I put it as a blowout, because if you open it, and you know, there's times in games where opening it actually wins you the game, because they won't have a way to stop it, and then they won't have a way to out Dragoon. I mean, a lot of decks can out Dragoon nowadays, that's why it's never going to get banned, but we put Red Eyes Fusion here in the blowouts. Cyberload Fusion, love-hate relationship with this card. Mostly hate that I love it, but it's really, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's great for recycling your cards, and it's good for the quick effect in the battle phase. It's good for setting it, using it on your opponent's turn with your overflow, but I really just want to play my ulti first ed Cyber Twin, I guess, and that's why I want to put it in the deck, but it's probably not going to happen unless we're just talking about for fun. And then 2 very nostalgic cards that are absolutely blowouts. Limiter Removal, Power Bond. 2 cards, personally I don't recommend them, but they absolutely fall into the blowout category, and if they resolve, there's a good chance you're winning that turn right then and there, so they fit this. Again, these are some of the blowout cards. Play 2 to 3, so we got 6 starters, 12 to 18 extenders, 2 to 3 blowouts. I mean, right now if you're maxing at all of those, that's 24, because emergency doubles up, so we still have 16 more cards to fill in. What do you do if you can't see your starter cards? Ideally, you're playing 10 plus starters, so you'll see them over 80% of the time. We only have 6, so that's not the case, meaning we need a way to defend ourselves before we see our starters, before our plays really kick off. So that brings us to our defensive cards, and again, kind of like extenders, our defensive cards, we're going to break it up into two different categories: reactive, responsive. And our definition for these: reactive are cards that react to your opponent's actions. They're cards you're using on your opponent's turn. Hand traps, emergency, electromagnetic turtle, using that from your graveyard. Personally not a big fan, because at least against, you know, high level decks, they put out a negate before you would actually be able to use your turtle. But if you like it and it works for you and it works for your local, it works for your meta, it works for where you're playing, by all means keep playing it. Like, don't fix what ain't broken. But to a bigger event, I probably would not take it. Hand traps, you know, I think that Ash, Skullmeister, and Droll and Lockbird are probably the three most main deck worthy hand traps at the moment. And then you have things like Ghost Bell, DD Crow, and Psyframe Gear Gamma probably right behind those. Lancia also deserves a really good honorable mention. Not too big on Nibiru at the moment neither. I'm not even citing it. But then we get our responsive cards. So reactive is reacting to your opponent's actions as it happens. Responsive, these are cards that you respond to their board. They're cards that you use after they already built their board, after they did their plays. Now it's your turn. You're responding to their board. Kaiju, Forbidden Droplet, Dark Ruler No More, all of our removals. This means Lightning Storm, Chaos, Cosmic Cyclone, Twin Twisters, Evenly Matched, all these cards. And this also includes our traps. And we put traps here because you're not really going to use them to react on your opponent's turn one. You kind of set them all, and then you respond to your opponent with them and respond to their board, to their plays with them. But if you're playing the traps, this is where they'd go in. And that does bring us to a good point. The Cyber Trap deck kind of ignores these rules a little bit because, well, you're throwing a lot more traps in, and pretty much any trap deck ignores the golden rules of deck building. But for this, we're going to say play like 9 to 15 defensive cards, whether that's 9 hand traps and then 3 responsive cards, or if you will. Personally, we're playing 13. We have 9 hand traps, 1 Kaiju, 3 Dark Ruler No More, and that's where we're going with that. So personally, I think, like I said, play 12 plus ideally, because we need to at least be able to survive the game long enough to get to our starters, or to see enough of our extenders that pair up with each other, such as like Hers dupe, Naxter dupe, things like that. Additionally, I don't know why I'm even saying additionally, but the next category we're gonna say placeholders. Just for what people know what a placeholder is, it's a card that just holds a place. There's really only one in the game, Upstart Goblin. If you want to play it and basically make your deck 39 cards, go for it, because it just holds the place of that card. That's a placeholder. Pot of Greed was probably the best placeholder ever, because it was a +1 in the process. Don't give your opponent life points, but it's banned, so you know, no one even knows what it does. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast and you guys have been able to keep up. If you have any cards that you think are extenders or blowouts or starters that we can use, or defensive cards I may have missed, I mean, that one's going to be pretty vague because there's a huge list of defensive cards, so maybe we'll not talk about that. But if there's more starters, extenders, or blowouts that you think deserve to get mentioned, comment them down in the comments down below if we can talk straight. And we can discuss things like that and see what you guys are playing. But yeah, otherwise the last and final category is the brick cards, the cards that we're going to build a house with. Ideally, you know, if you could, you'd say play less than 3 of these, but sometimes that's just not possible, because if you're playing Gamma, that means Driver comes along. If you're playing Dragoon, Dark Magician and Red Eyes come along. If you're playing Dupe, that's 3 Cyber Dragons, and if you're not, that's 1 Cyber Dragon still. And I understand that Cyber Dragon is not necessarily a brick, but where else would we put it on, like, in regards to these other categories? It's not a starter, it's not an extender, it's not a blowout card, and it can brick your hand. So out of these categories, I think it falls into the brick category the most. but going second, if you open just the one, it actually is not a brick because you just special summon it and can at least do that. But going first, it's a brick. It's a card you really don't want to see in your hand ever, brick. And like I said, opening multiples, which isn't likely to happen, but if it does, brick. So we are going to put Cyber Dragon as a brick, but keep that in mind that it's not always going to be one. So quick covering everything that we kind of just learned here: 6 starters, 12 to 18 extenders, 10 being superior, 2 being additional or more of each, 2 to 3 blowout cards. I personally recommend Overflow the most, obviously, and Red Eyes Fusion, and then I would probably say Cyberload Fusion, Leveneer, or Eltonin, one of those 3, and then 9 to 15 defensive cards. You know, you're probably playing 1 to 6 bricks. Ideally, I would try and keep it at 5, like not play Gamma, Dragoon, and Dupe if you can help it, especially this format where Gamma's just really not the blowout that it once was, because Meister and Ash kind of do the same thing without the brick factor, and then obviously a placeholder in Upstart. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit. Thank you guys for watching, and take care until next time.